Hi, welcome everybody to this week's Crashes and Taxes. I am your host with this little podcast, Crashes and Taxes, Rebecca Walser. So excited that you have joined me. I'm sitting in my office, as you can probably tell. And I wanted to talk today about the post office. There's been so much, information and consternation around the post office in the media because of this idea that, people aren't going to feel safe to vote in November in person. So they're going to want to vote by mail. And there's this plan that everyone should be voting by mail. And then the post office in the last couple of weeks in its normal course of operations, because we're going to get into why this all happened, but in their normal course of operations, they were removing machines, and that got out that it was this big conspiracy theory for Trump to remove machines that's sorting mail because he doesn't want the vote by mail. And so this has all been in the news. And so a couple of points on that. The first thing I'd say is that I don't think anybody has a problem with people voting via the post office. I think what the problem is there are substantial amounts of documented case of fraudulent voting that has occurred through vote by mail. And the problem isn't the post office in and of itself. The problem is how is the ballot received and then mailed out. And that specifically is the problem. So what I will tell you is that the absentee ballot process is not a problem on the vote by mail front, meaning that if I'm planning, and I've done this actually before, I've been out of the country before on day of voting, and I have requested an absentee ballot. When you request an absentee ballot because you're not going to be able, and you're not going to be able to vote in person, what happens is you do establish your identity and the validity of your ballot and the fact that you are a registered and valid voter in that area, that district, and then you get an actual ballot by the Postal Service by mail, and you're able to mail it in. But you have been verified as a voter that lives at that address that is correctly registered in that particular district. And therefore, there's verification that the ballot is going to a legitimately registered voter. And that's the problem. If you notice, the governor of New Jersey has basically lambasted out that he is going to mail out ballots basically to everybody, and that if these people have moved and it goes to the wrong address, doesn't matter, whoever is there who maybe may or may not be registered can fill it out and send it in. And this is where the problem of actual fraudulent voting is been documented. So for those people that believe that there is no problem and that this is all made up, that is incorrect. There is substantial amounts of data available for how even just this year, New York had themselves to send, throw out 122,000 fraudulent vote by mail ballots. So you can understand, no matter what party you're on, if you have somebody who wants to have a verification-based process like absentee ballot, when mailing out massive ballots to just everybody at an address where they were last registered could be problematic. Interestingly enough, I saw another report this morning talking about somebody who two people were in the household and one person's ballot was accepted and the other person's ballot was not and never found again. And interestingly enough, what this person did was record what the ballots looked like before they sent them in. And one of these persons was a Democrat and the other person was a Republican. And apparently from the outside of the ballot, a D shows up on the Democratic ballot and an R shows up on the Republican ballot. And so apparently you can see from the outside of the ballot what the party affiliation is, and then you could easily decide whichever way you lean to fill out ballots or to not count ballots or what have you. So that's a problem too. We shouldn't be knowing anybody's affiliation from the outside of the actual envelope that mails anything. That is ridiculous. That should not be. You should not be able to discriminate against anybody's vote, whichever way they lean. It does not matter. It should be a fair election completely. So that's all the reason that I started to wanted to kind of talk about the post office today. But what I really want to get into is the financial aspect of the post office, which is fascinating because it turns out that the reason that these machines were sort of being taken away is that the post office is obviously operating in the red. They have been. The last year they turned a profit was 2006. And so they haven't been profitable for 14 years. And it's really a phenomenon that started in the 90s, early 2000s when we went to email. So the most lucrative way for the post office to make money before really email became the way of communication was snail mail, first class letter. And we used to all send mail. I actually remember being in college. This is going to date me some, but I remember being in college and sending my bills through the mail. I can actually remember mailing out checks to pay bills, which seems so crazy now. But I remember I was like, wow, I got to get this in the mail by such and such time. Otherwise, I'll be late. I'll have a late fee. Good God, that was so long ago. So that's all ended. We pay everything online. We send everything via email and electronic attachment. We don't use much snail mail at all. That was their most profitable piece of business. So when they lost that, they had to become much more competitive price-wise with FedEx and UPS for shipping, and that's kind of where they went outside of the snail mail that still does get delivered. But they're operating in a huge red. Last year alone, we lost on the U.S. Postal Service almost $9 billion. $9 billion in 1 year, just 2019 alone. The accumulated debt now that has been accumulated is $160 billion. $80 billion of that has just come since 2006, our last profitable year. So we have taken a total loss from 2007 on of $80 billion. We also had legacy debt costs, pension costs of $80 billion. You could add those together, and we're $160 billion in the red, and we add to it every year. So, of course, you've got people that want to leverage the post office to help their business. And so Jamie Dimon of Chase, JP Morgan Chase, had this idea that perhaps they could bring banking into the post office, which it used to be, there was some banking done by the post office between 1911 and 1967. They used to basically have savings accounts, and they would offer travelers, checks and those kinds of things, treasury checks, money orders. But they kind of got away from that, and now people don't even go to the post office anymore. We have 35,000 physical post office in the United States of America, 35,000 locations. And yet some of these communities are underserved and don't even have a bank. So JP Morgan Chase and Dimon's proposal is that they bring ATMs to these 35,000. They lease space from the federal government, creating revenue from the federal government, and they give people access to ATMs and potentially even expanding into some possible other banking services right there in the bank. Now, this would be a win for Chase, clearly, because they have all these legacy branches that people don't really visit much anymore. So if they still want to have an in-person contact, but they don't want to maintain their own branch, they could simply lease space from the $35,000 post office, 35,000 post office that we have all over the country. It would be obviously a win for the U.S. government because we would be getting revenue in the form of these lease payments from Chase, all these locations that they would go into. So that's a win. But yet, of course, some people aren't going to agree with any kind of public or private partnership, even when the USPS is losing $9 billion a year. So when this proposal came out, I guess freshman representative from New York, Ocasio-Cortez, basically said, no, of course, we should not have a for-profit public option for banking services. We need to have a non-profit or not-for-profit public option for banking services, and we should be piloting these through the U.S. Postal Service. So AOC basically said, no private public partnership. Let's have the United States of America through its Postal Service get into the banking business. A couple issues with that. When you get into the banking business, you're in the most, if not the most heavily restricted and compliance industry in the United States. And I don't think that we need the United States of America's bank making lending decisions to people. I think that that is a huge legal quagmire of discrimination lawsuits. And I know a ton of lawyers that would take those up. So I don't think that the United States should be getting into the banking business itself directly. It would be very expensive to do that. And it would be, it would violate so many different laws I can think of off the top of my head. I don't see that as a possibility unless we change a lot of stuff. So perhaps some politicians want more of a socialistic, the government takes over everything and provides everything to people. But this has been proven through the history of time to be a failure. There is not a successful example of pure government takeover that is actually very profitable and great for the end user. I mean, they just love the government service that they get, and it is something that can be delivered seamlessly and efficiently. There is none. One of the reasons we have so many problems with the United States Postal Service is not because it's so expensive to send an actual piece of mail necessarily, or the shipping obviously does well and makes money. It's the fact that we have all of these legacy expenses of our payroll system with the USPS. I don't know if anyone has ever checked into becoming a postal worker, but the pension benefits, the retirement benefits, and the government healthcare benefits are absolutely incredible. So when you have such great benefits that could have been and were supported for many, many years with the legacy system, with the amount of mail that was actually being sent through the mail, it was able to support those kinds of costs, those kinds of legacy costs. But now with the new model, with how things aren't actually being covered, we're not even covering the cost of what it costs us to run the system, then obviously we can't support, furthering. And this is just the perfect example of government not working. You've got a completely governmentized system, no private interaction at all, and it is losing $9 billion a year, whereas FedEx and UPS, private carriers of shipping, are in the black and having one of the best years ever because of the coronavirus and because of all the shipping that is being done to have deliveries to residential communities. So why isn't the USPS having one of the best years ever, just like UPS and just like FedEx? And the fact that they're not goes to show you that their structure is different as a government-controlled and a government-run machine. So I don't know what the solution is, but I can tell you that a solution of more of the same, like let's go ahead and bring on more government services into this thing that's already failing and drowning in its own debt. Let's bring on more government services that are more expensive, and let's not have any public-private partnership, is probably not going to be successful, just like everything the government tries to run completely autonomously by itself, besides the military, usually is not successful. And we should probably look into some sort of public-private partnership that could bring us some revenues, like Chase. Maybe it's not Chase. Maybe we outsource it and give it to the highest bidder. That's what we do, and then we get ATMs and all of the postal services around the world, around the United States, and people can get to, get some banking services and go to the post office, and maybe they'll even mail more letters if they actually physically go, or maybe they'll ship something at the USPS instead of going into UPS or FedEx. They'll actually use the government shipping because they'll be there, because the ATM in their bank will be there. It's not a bad idea. It's an idea worth some merit, unless you just want to say that it's bad that anybody ever makes a profit, and even if they can deliver the services more efficiently at a profit for less money than the government could, we should just forget and let the government do everything and run us all straight into the ground with losses and debt out the wazoo, and we just implode on ourselves just like Rome did. That's eventually where we're headed if we don't figure out better ways to deliver government services for less money and at a profit, at least for the U.S. taxpayer. Until next week, everybody, I'm Rebecca Walser. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you on the next Crashes and Taxes.